house has a heart, and it is pounding. The bass shudders through the wall, and Alice leans back into it. That wall is out of place as she is. A shock of freshly painted green, fairy lights running up and down like little neon flowers, and lets the beat knock against her own ribs.
That was just one of three women narrating best-selling author V.E. Schwab's newest book, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. This is her most personal book yet. That concerns me since it involves three hungry, raging vampires. There's a lot going on under the covers of this book. Love, loss, anger, and challenges women have faced throughout history. Victoria lives in Edinburgh, Scotland, but she's kicking off her tour today, starting in Denver, Colorado. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us again. Before we get into the pages of this particular novel, let's talk a little bit about the pages of your life. You grew up in Nashville, which is a town that is known for telling stories set to music, but you always loved telling stories and poems. In fact, you wrote something as early as 15?
I did. I wrote poems all through my teenage years. I think it's a key before you write fiction to kind of find a cadence and a flow for yourself.
Yeah. With that said, you loved writing, but you went to school, off to college, thinking that you would major in astrophysics. But then, like a lot of college students, you changed your mind a lot over the course of being in school.
I did. I think it's like I fell more in love with the idea of the narrative, right? So I loved the narrative of space, or I loved the narrative of different cultures and time periods. And so over the course of changing my major 6 times, I realized I just like the storytelling element.
Yeah. Do you think that the delay was, sometimes we think what we love doing and is our passion is not necessarily a living. And so, stick to STEM.
Exactly. Though, to be fair, I think I still should have stick to STEM because it's such an objective profession, and instead I've chosen a job that's entirely subjective.
No, I think you're doing okay. All right. Your first novel, you wrote it your sophomore year in college, and you never thought you'd actually write a novel, but you were able to commit and do that. Now, I get asked all the time from people, they're like, I want to write a book. As they say, everyone has a book in them. Like, but how do I get started? And I don't know, because I'm not a novelist, but I always look at them and say, you just start. You had a system.
Yeah, I think starting is easier than finishing. I think if you look at like the metrics for how many people have an idea for a story, and then a slightly smaller group is how many people start a story, and then a far smaller group is how many people finish a story. So I always work backwards from an ending that excites me. So that way, as I'm writing toward it, on a bad day, I'm not going to quit because I know it's there. And on a good day, I have a sense of momentum to work toward.
Yeah. The second novel, The Near Witch, what was it like to finally get to the end? It's published, it's out there, and it's in a store.
I mean, you kind of expect the world to change, and for the most of us, it doesn't. I mean, it would be 8 novels later before I hit a bestseller list. It would be, another 10 before The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So I think what you discover is that each story that you put out into the world doesn't have to be the biggest story you ever tell, but they add up over time. They create a sense of a foundation on which to build your career.
Yeah. All right. Let's share with people the kind of novelist you are. You have your own fingerprint, if you will, and the genre and your books have become so intensely interesting to people because you take us into whole different worlds.
Yeah, I think I want to take you into different worlds, but I want to set them in our world, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think of fantasy as having 2 lines, one tells you will only ever reach this world or this magic through the pages of a book like Tolkien. But C.S. Lewis told you that somewhere in your house was a wardrobe with no back, right? I want to make you believe in magic in our world, in our times, in our history. And so it's about kind of bringing the supernatural and the fantastical in to our space and layering it on top of reality so that it feels incredibly grounded and incredibly possible.
Yeah. A book cover says a lot, all right? It's kind of like a good label on a wine bottle. It makes you want to snatch it up.
Definitely.
So book cover has a lot, but the title has a lot. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. That just conjures up things. All right, so take us behind the plot of this book because it's intense. There's a lot going on here.
It is. It is a book about hunger, right? It's the story of 3 women over the course of almost 500 years and how their lives and deaths and lives again begin to intertwine. So it's a story about immortality, but specifically it's about rage. It's about desire. It's about hunger not only for nourishment or for selfhood, but for revenge, hunger to take up space in a world that tells you to be small. So yes, it's an intertwining narrative, a cat and mouse tale. It's a horror, as much as it is a love story. But I think that so often in our world, horror and romance go hand in hand because there's a fear to moving through this world in certain forms, a fear to being seen as prey when you want to be predator.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like over hundreds of years of that same theme, running through society. I said earlier that this is your most personal work yet. In what way?
It is. It is. It's a queer story. It's about queer identity. It's about specifically queer identity within relationships and within community. And then when you set that within history, it's the times in which, there's an expectation to hide who you are, to live an inauthentic self. And so in that way, it's about the hunger to be seen for who you are. I like to say that the three women at the center of this book kind of represent my three stages of a coming out journey. Alice doesn't even know who she is or who she wants to be. Charlotte knows who she is and is terrified of it and just wants to be loved. And then Sabine, my villain, is unapologetically herself. And I like to think that's where I'm at in my own arc.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you talk about it as a coming out story in that way, it's really a journey that I think most of us take through life, right?
Absolutely.
Other works, you mentioned earlier, the Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. You've had this success after success after success. How do you start an idea for a book?
I like to think of books or stories as like a meal. And so in that way, an idea isn't one meal, it's one ingredient. And so ideas or meals can be made up of dozens of ingredients, dozens of ideas. With both Addie and Bury Our Bones, I wanted to explore time and legacy and art and what it means to leave a mark on the world, what it means to matter, and whether it's enough to matter to one person or whether you need to matter to a greater landscape. It's also about memory. Immortality has this counterbalance of if you're immortal and everyone around you's not, there's this sense of loss and memory of you being the only person to hold things up. And then there's fun, there's imagery, there's atmospheres, there's song choices. And so I build my meals, my stories out of an amalgamation of different ingredients that I want to play with. And that's why each one kind of becomes its own food, its own genre of food.
Yeah. Well, this one is a plateful for sure. All right. You have your tour that kicks off today, and your first print run, 300,000 signed copies?
Yes, I signed every single copy.
Wow.
It took, just for metrically for people, it took 2.5 months of signing my name 7,000 times a day. And it took, I think, about 700 Sharpies.
Geez. Okay. Well, you got to get a Sharpie endorsement now.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and congratulations on finishing this book and getting it out starting today.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil hit store shelves tomorrow. You can find more information about the novel on greatdayhouston.com.